Alright, hello, this is Richard, and this will be a bit of a short little teaser on an article I've recently read called This is Water by David Foster Wallace. Now, I read it a couple of weeks ago in English class. Thought it was interesting, but never thought much of it until I was watching um, Jordan Peterson's recent conversation with two British theologians, and one of them mentioned it, and so I thought I should go back and look at it a bit deeper because it seems to be more widely known than I previously thought. Excuse me. And so this is perhaps just an encouragement to go back and read that, say why I think it's important, and so on. And I just want to do some background on who David Foster Wallace is, because I think what makes this article so amazing is that it foreshadows a lot of the thoughts that people like Paul Vanderklay and John Vervaeke have been formulating only recently on things like religion, but that David Foster Wallace is really saying in 2005, so almost more than 15 years ago. And I think the reason why that foreshadowing exists is because David Foster Wallace is first and foremost he's an artist in the sense that he writes fiction. And now this goes to Peterson's point that the artists, and perhaps right next to the artists are the narrative writers, are always on the edge of things. They're always sort of bringing new ideas to the forefront. And so I think a lot of that has to do with why David Foster Wallace preempted so many of the things he did. So in this commencement address, the pretense for it is a thesis about what he thinks a liberal arts education is meant to do. It's in the context of a commencement address, so that's a common thing to do, but he makes the interesting move of insisting so strongly that the purpose behind a liberal arts education is very religious. Now, he won't come out and say that word religious, but without a clear understanding, I think if you asked him, he would have agreed that the things he was saying were very explicitly religious. And the reason why he explicitly used that word religion is because a lot of what he's doing is translating religion W into religion S. People in a liberal arts college, as it were, are going to be reactive if they hear anything that too strongly endorses Christianity or even any one religion. And so he has to translate a lot of these religious ideas into more secular terms that won't trigger the allergy that his audience has towards his message. But at the end of the day, almost all of Wallace's points, and all of the points, excuse me, I'm still getting over a bit of a cold. All of the points, certainly that I'm going to discuss here today, are explicitly religious in nature. So we'll go with the first quote, and I'm just going to read this out. The really significant education and thinking that we're supposed to get in a place like this isn't really about the capacity to think, but rather about the choice of what to think about. Now, this is very sort of counter-enlightenment. The Enlightenment idea is that you want to develop your capacities to know about the right things, to have a lot of knowledge in a specific area. I think that's what he um means by capacity. But this quote really lines up with the emerging field of cognitive science and John Bevecchi's work. Like John Bevecchi talks about salience landscaping. Like the world, what the world is made out of ultimately, in some sense, doesn't really matter. What matters is what's salient to you, what's relevant to you. Is you're going to pay attention to that, and that's what you're going to act towards. And this also, yeah, this is why John Bevecchi and Jonathan Peugeot get along so well. Is that Jonathan Peugeot will say something like, "The world is made of attention." That implies that what ultimately matters in this world is what you pay attention to, not necessarily what the world is per se. Now, this is a very preliminary point that Wallace makes, but it's going to be very important for understanding the rest of his argument. So the next quote I picked was quote, "It means being conscious and aware enough to choose what you pay attention to and to choose how you construct meaning from experience." And this is in the context of talking about what it means to be educated, what it means to be well adjusted. He uses that language in life. And like this this implicitly recognizes the importance of what we've been calling meaning, the importance of directing your life towards something higher, right? Because he says that the purpose of attention, which we already established is really ultimate reality, the purpose of attention is to construct a meaning for yourself. And like this is what Jordan Peterson hammers home so hard, is that meaning, this is something he'll say, meaning is the arc that will carry you through suffering. And you have John Bevecchi in his meaning crisis theory saying that modernity, the current tools we are given by the modern frame that we are in, are insufficient for building meaning. Like, Wallace has so many brilliant illustrations about this. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to John Bevecchi's diagnosis that the world we have built, which is a thoroughly technological and commodified, ultimately doesn't have a place for us in it, because there is no room for meaning within the modern frame. And so all of this climaxes in this final quote where Wallace says, "This, I submit, is the freedom of a real education, of learning how to be well adjusted. You get to consciously decide what has meaning and what doesn't, and you get to decide what to worship." Now, I referenced Peugeot earlier, but this is full-blown Peugeot. This is Peugeot's thesis, is that what ultimately matters, is what you worship. Because if attention builds meaning, what is most meaningful to you is what you worship. And how is that not a religious claim? Right? Like, this is even a cliche evangelical point at this stage. And he, like, Wallace goes even further. Like, he, as I say here, he shows his Christian hand because he will go on to talk about self-sacrifice as his highest virtue. Now, if self-sacrifice isn't the highest virtue in Christianity, I don't know what is besides the love, perhaps. Because who in this modern world will put self-sacrifice as their highest virtue? They certainly won't live without. Some of them, if you ask them, might like to pretend that it's their highest virtue. But more and more, people aren't concerned with self-sacrifice. They're concerned with themselves. Chiefly with themselves. And so here, like, Wallace makes an argument that Christianity is the antidote to finding meaning in life and knowing what to worship. Like, he doesn't explicitly say that. And maybe he doesn't even recognize it. But the argument he laid out is so thoroughly Christian that it's hard to distinguish him from a professing Christian. And this is a real problem for for secular people. Because if you look at Wallace's bio, he was a Christian. He grew up a Christian before public deconstruction. Out of that in his teenage years, I dug deep enough, but he was obviously in that tradition long enough to implicitly absorb its story and the consequences of that story and the importance which that tradition places on that story. And this comes out so fully and pointedly in Wallace's piece. And so, like I said, Wallace preempts a lot of what we're doing here. I think it's an amazing thing to see a lot of these ideas 15 years earlier than a lot of people have been talking about them now. And I just highly recommend reading it because Wallace provides such a great articulation and a great synthesis of a lot of what this current corner of the internet that we have around Vander Clay Peugeot, Paul, Benjamin Boyce, and Burn Power, and all of these people, what we've been trying to build. And so I hope I have persuaded you to do so, but nonetheless, I hope that all of you are doing well and that this finds you well.